Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Now stay with us. The story begins. Chicago in the morning felt like a massive machine that hadn't had its coffee yet. Traffic lights changed too quickly, horns screamed nonstop, and the glass faces of skyscrapers reflected a cold, unforgiving sunlight that made the entire city look wrapped in steel. Jessica Starling sat behind the wheel of her 12-year-old Honda Civic, her hands clenched so tightly they had gone numb. 8:45 a.m. She glanced at the clock, then at the Sterling Industries building rising ahead of her, a towering mass of glass and steel. Perfect, immaculate, cold. It looked exactly like a place not meant for girls like her. "You have to make it. You have to make it," Jessica muttered, as if the words might somehow slow down the hands of the clock. Today was her first day of work. Not the first day at your dream job kind of first day. This was the first day at her last chance before life sighed and turned its back on her. A temporary secretary position, possibly permanent if she could make a good impression. That line from the staffing agency still echoed in her head. Light, indifferent, as if impressions were as easy to buy as takeout coffee. Jessica worked nights waitressing at a diner, ran catering gigs on weekends, and caught up on sleep during the scraps of time most people used to live. She needed stability, health insurance, a path that didn't slowly break her body apart. And everything depended on one thing: not being late on her first day. She turned into the underground parking garage. The air inside was cold and dim. Pale yellow fluorescent lights stretched on like a tunnel with no exit. Level 1, full. Level 2, full. Jessica's heart began to race. 8:47. No, please. Level 3. And then she saw it. The perfect parking space. Close to the elevators. Completely empty. Bright under the lights. Jessica almost cried. She turned on her signal and eased her car forward, careful as if the dream might shatter if she moved too fast. A dark shape flashed across her vision. A sleek black Mercedes glided in from the opposite direction, impossibly smooth, almost cruel in its precision, and slid straight into her parking spot. Jessica slammed on the brakes. She sat there frozen for a second. Then anger flared. Hot, sharp, uninvited. "No way," she said out loud. Jessica yanked the parking brake, threw open her door, and stepped out, her heels striking hard against the damp concrete. She marched straight toward the Mercedes and planted herself directly in front of its hood. The driver's door opened, and the world tilted. The man who stepped out was taller than she'd expected. Over 6 feet. He stood straight, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark gray suit that fit him with infuriating perfection. His black hair was neatly styled, his jaw sharp, cheekbones high, the kind of cold beauty that made you angry simply because it existed. Jessica hated it. She hated the way her heart stumbled for half a second before anger reclaimed control. He looked at her, from head to toe, with calm irritation, as if she were nothing more than a minor administrative inconvenience in his perfect morning. "Excuse me," Jessica said, her voice sharp as a blade. "Are you blind?" One dark eyebrow lifted. He looked surprised and amused. "I don't believe so," he replied, his voice low, slow, and maddeningly calm. "Then you saw my turn signal," Jessica snapped, pointing at her car. "I was parking, clearly." "I saw an empty space," he said, closing his car door with a soft click, "and I parked in it. That's generally how things work." Jessica stared at him. "Are you serious?" She gave a dry laugh. "Do you always move through life stepping on other people to get what you want?" Something flickered in his eyes. So fast she wasn't sure she hadn't imagined it. "I'm in a hurry," he said. "You should find another spot. There are plenty below." "I've been circling for 10 minutes, Jessica shot back, "and I'm late for my first day of work, a job I really need." She gestured sharply at him. "But of course, that probably doesn't matter to someone like you." "Someone like me?" he repeated slowly. "What do you think you know about me?" Jessica laughed, bitterly. "I know you drive a car worth an entire year of my income. I know that suit probably costs more to dry clean than I spend on food in a week. And I know you think you're entitled to take whatever you want, whenever you want. For a moment, his face stiffened. There was something almost like hurt. Then it vanished. You're blocking my way, he said colder now. Move. Jessica glanced around the nearly empty garage and laughed, loud and sharp. Move where? Who exactly am I blocking besides you and me? He turned away and headed for the elevators. The way he dismissed her, as if she didn't exist, made something explode in Jessica's chest. You know what? She called after him. I hope you're late. I hope something important in your life falls apart because you couldn't be a decent human being. He stopped at the elevator doors, turned around. For a brief second, the fluorescent lights caught in his amber-brown eyes, and Jessica could swear she saw regret. Good luck with your new job, he said. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside. Gone. Jessica stood there, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. 8:56. Damn it! She sprinted back to her car, shot down to level 6, grabbed a spot as far from the elevators as possible, and ran. Her pencil skirt felt too tight. The borrowed heels from her roommate clacked loudly with every step. She dove into the elevator. 9:03. Jessica slipped into the conference room just in time to be 3 minutes late. A blonde woman with a flawless bun stood at the front, facing a presentation screen, studying her with a polite smile that never reached her eyes. You must be Jessica Starling, she said. We're glad you made it. Jessica swallowed hard and quietly took a seat. She tried to breathe. But the image of the man in the parking garage, that deep voice, those arrogant eyes, clung to her mind like a stain that wouldn't wash away. And now, the woman said, changing the slide, allow me to introduce the CEO of Sterling Industries. The screen switched. Jessica stopped breathing. That face, that jaw, those eyes. The man with the Mercedes, Dominic Sterling. The blood drained from her face. Her heart dropped straight to the floor. Welcome, the woman said smoothly. Your new boss. Jessica could think of only one thing. I just yelled at my boss. And this was only the first morning. For the first few seconds after the slide changed, Jessica Starling no longer felt like she was sitting in her chair. She couldn't feel her legs, couldn't feel her hands. All she could feel was the sound of her own heartbeat, as if someone had placed a speaker inside her chest and cranked the volume to max. On the massive screen in front of the room was the face of the man she had just argued with in the parking lot less than an hour ago. That same sharp jawline, that same carved cheekbone, those same amber-brown eyes. But this time, illuminated by perfect lighting, against a classy corporate backdrop, with his name typed in an elegant corporate font, Dominic Sterling, Chief Executive Officer. If life were a movie, the camera would be zooming tightly on Jessica's face right now, with the faint sound of an entire universe exploding behind her. No way. She blinked. But the name was still there. The face was still there. No way. There was no universe cruel enough to make the CEO look exactly like the jerk who stole her parking spot earlier. Sterling Industries was founded 30 years ago. The blonde woman, Patricia, the HR representative, continued evenly at the podium, and is currently led by its second generation, Dominic Sterling, the youngest CEO in the company's history. Jessica couldn't hear a single word after that. Her mind could only replay two overlapping images. The man shuts the door of his black Mercedes with infuriating calm. The man on the screen was introduced as a cold-blooded prodigy of the financial world. Same eyes, same voice, same person. Dear God. Someone call 911 for me, she thought. I just committed career suicide with my mouth in the company parking lot. Patricia continued, completely unaware that a certain intern in the second row was having a cardiovascular event. Mr. Sterling is known for being a perfectionist who values professional ethics and work attitude. He believes that how a person behaves in small matters reflects how they handle big ones. Jessica wanted to burst into tears. Small matters. Like yelling straight into his face that he was selfish, arrogant, and privileged in an underground parking lot. This morning, cold sweat trickled down the back of her neck. Jessica? Patricia's voice suddenly cut sharper. She jerked upright. Are you all right? Patricia asked, her polite smile faltering. You look a little pale. I'm fine, Jessica blurted out too quickly. I just didn't sleep enough, and didn't have coffee, and didn't... She shut her mouth. Probably not a good time to list everything she was lacking, including brain cells. Patricia smiled again and moved to the next slide. Now we'll talk about the organizational structure and temporary assignments. The word assignments hit Jessica's ears like a cinder block. And this was the moment that decided where she would be dumped, assuming she still had a job to be dumped into. She prayed silently. Not the CEO, not the executive floor. Send her to the warehouse, the photocopy room, IT, heck, ship her to a different branch. She would happily spend her life befriending a color printer. Patricia began reading the list, one name at a time. A girl went to marketing. The curly-haired guy went to finance. Another guy to HR. Jessica Starling. Her turn. Jessica straightened instinctively, even though her soul was already crawling under the table. Yes, ma'am, she croaked. Patricia checked the chart, then looked up with a slightly brighter smile. You'll be assigned to the Executive Administration Division, directly supporting, she emphasized, the CEO's office. There was a deafening silence inside Jessica's skull. Supporting who? She asked, clinging to hope she misheard. The CEO's office, Patricia repeated. The executive floor. A wonderful opportunity to observe how the corporation is run. If you perform well, this could be a phenomenal launchpad for your career. Or a phenomenal guillotine, Jessica thought, smiling like a corpse. The rest of the orientation passed like a muted film. Patricia talked about benefits, vacation policies, dress codes, and confidentiality. The other interns nodded and took notes. Jessica heard only one sentence looping endlessly in her brain. The CEO's office. The CEO's office. The CEO's office. She pictured herself knocking on a luxurious door, stepping in and meeting Dominic Sterling, who would lean back, give her a glacial smile and say, "Oh, you're the parking lot girl. Perfect. Saves me the trouble of finding you." She swallowed hard. Should she run? Grab her car, jump on the freeway, change her name, move to another state, start washing dishes and pretend Sterling Industries never existed? The thoughts spun around her skull before dying under a simple truth. She needed this job. She needed money for her mother's medical bills, for her brother's last year of high school. She needed anything that came with health insurance attached. So when the orientation ended, Jessica stood up like everyone else, holding her folder, pretending she was a functional adult who had not insulted the most powerful man in the building mere floors below. "You've been grouped," Patricia said brightly. "Your supervisors will take you to your work areas. Carolyn?" A woman in her 40s with a neat bob and a balanced mix of warmth and authority stepped forward. "Hello," she said. "I'm Carolyn Reed, Mr. Sterling's executive assistant. Anyone assigned to executive administration, please follow me." Which meant Jessica alone. She walked after Carolyn like she was walking to her execution, trying not to acknowledge the slight tremor in her legs. "Your name is Jessica, right?" Carolyn asked in the elevator. "Yes," she replied. "Don't worry too much," Carolyn smiled. "The executive floor sounds intimidating, but everyone up there is human." The problem is that one of them remembers my face too well, Jessica thought. The elevator doors opened onto a different world. High ceilings, crystal clear glass. Pale wood floors stretching endlessly, swallowing every heel click. The air carried an expensive mix of good coffee, subtle perfume, and power. Carolyn guided her past a line of minimalist desks where assistants typed at terrifying speeds. Everyone was perfectly dressed, not a wrinkled blazer in sight, no borrowed shoes half a size off. Jessica felt like a cheap sticker accidentally slapped on the cover of a luxury magazine. "This is the pantry," Carolyn gestured toward a corner with a fancy coffee machine and a minibar. "Here's the shared printer. That's meeting room A. And this..." She stopped at a desk just outside a large double wooden door, tapping the back of the empty chair. "Is your spot." Jessica looked at the door. No nameplate, no need. Everyone here knew exactly what was behind it. "You'll help me manage Mr. Sterling's schedule," Carolyn continued. "Sort documents, prepare files, answer some calls, and of course, keep confidential matters confidential." Yes, Jessica murmured. He's meeting with the board right now, Carolyn checked her watch. He may want to speak with you early this afternoon. Don't stress. He's demanding, but he's fair. If you knew I wished him a ruined life this morning, Jessica clenched her lips. For now, Carolyn smiled. Sit, review the procedures in your folder, and get acquainted with the internal mail system. Ask me if you need anything. Jessica nodded. Carolyn left her at the desk, facing a black monitor, a landline phone, and the sensation that her stomach had been dropped into a frozen lake. The entire lunch hour passed in a state of half focus, half panic. She logged into the system, changed her password, and skimmed a flood of automated welcome emails. She tried memorizing every protocol. She printed documents, tested internal messaging, and observed the rhythm of the executive floor. But none of it mattered, because above everything else, she was waiting for the sound of that door opening behind her. The door remained silent. Every time footsteps passed, she flinched. Every elevator ding made her swallow hard. Chapter 3. The first time he called her by name. Afternoons on the executive floor carried a very specific kind of silence. Not the silence of fatigue, but a controlled one, where every movement had purpose and every sound was carefully ordered. The steady tapping of keyboards, the low hum of the coffee machine, like a slow, measured breath. No one spoke loudly, no one rushed. Jessica Starling sat at the desk position just outside the double wooden doors to the CEO's office, trying to blend into that rhythm, trying and failing. Every one of her senses felt drawn tight, like a stretched wire. She was used to pressure, used to peak-hour diner chaos, drunken customers, shifts that dragged on until exhaustion became physical pain. But this was a different kind of pressure, one that didn't come from noise but from waiting. Waiting to be called in, waiting to be evaluated, waiting for judgment. The door behind her had remained silent for nearly an hour. She had just begun to relax when the desk phone rang. Jessica jumped, then picked it up immediately. CEO's office. This is Jessica Starling. A brief pause, and then that voice, low, clear, more familiar than she liked to admit. Jessica, please come into my office. 7 words, not sharp, not cold, not gentle either, but enough to send her heart dropping straight into her stomach. Yes, she replied, setting the receiver down with slightly trembling fingers. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and took a deep breath, as if preparing to step into the most important interview of her life. The wooden doors opened silently. Dominic Sterling's office was flooded with afternoon light. Floor-to-ceiling glass revealed an expansive view of Lake Michigan, the deep blue water shimmering with silver reflections. High above, a few clouds drifted lazily, calm and indifferent, as though completely unaware that someone below was wrestling with her fate. Dominic stood beside his desk, his back to her. He wasn't wearing his jacket. His shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. His tie lay neatly on the desk. A very different Dominic from the untouchable CEO shown on the slides that morning. "Could you close the door?" he said without turning around. Jessica did. The soft click echoed in her head like a heavy punctuation mark. Dominic turned around. It was the first time they faced each other in a truly private space. In that moment, Jessica realized his gaze was nothing like it had been earlier. Gone was the passing glance among dozens of employees. Gone, too, was the arrogant look from the parking garage. This was the gaze of someone who had chosen to engage. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Jessica sat down. Her back is straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She became aware that she was holding herself too perfectly, like a student waiting to be called on. Silence settled again. Dominic didn't rush. He walked toward the windows and looked out at the lake for several seconds. Long enough for Jessica to suspect that fate itself was suspending her here for amusement. Then he spoke. "I want to talk about this morning." Jessica swallowed. "Yes," she said, faster than necessary. "About that, I'm truly sorry. I behaved unprofessionally. I didn't know at the time that you were—" "Jessica!" He cut her off. His voice wasn't raised, not sharp, but firm enough to stop her instantly. He turned back, leaning lightly against the edge of the desk, his gaze fixed on her. "I owe you an apology." 3 words. Clear, direct, no conditions. Jessica froze. She had prepared herself for countless scenarios, being reprimanded, warned, even dismissed before she had typed a single line. But not this. "You're apologizing?" she asked before she could stop herself. "For the parking space," Dominic said. "For the way I spoke to you, and for making you walk into your first day here feeling diminished." There was no anger in his eyes, no arrogance, only a blunt honesty that knocked her heartbeat off rhythm. "I was selfish," he continued, his voice lower, "and you had every right to be angry." Jessica opened her mouth, then closed it. 100 responses raced through her mind, but only one honest sentence emerged. "I shouldn't have said those things to you." "In part you should have," Dominic replied without hesitation. "In part you shouldn't." He studied her more closely now, as if assessing something beyond a resume. "Very few people dare to tell me when I'm wrong," he said. "You're the first in a long time." The air between them subtly shifted. No longer strictly CEO and secretary, not quite equals, but somewhere, somehow, the balance of power had moved. Dominic nudged a stack of folders aside and continued, his tone calm. "Regarding the parking space, I've asked my assistant to arrange a permanent parking pass for you." Jessica blinked. "Where? Exactly?" "Level 3, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Near the elevators." Something unfamiliar rose in her chest. Not material joy, but the feeling of being acknowledged. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I did," Dominic replied, "because I don't want you thinking this place runs on arbitrary privilege. I want you here because of your abilities, not because I pushed you aside on your very first morning." Jessica looked at him. This time she wasn't afraid, only mildly unsettled, and aware of a quiet stir she hadn't yet named. Dominic held her gaze a beat longer, then, the last thing she expected, he smiled. Not a polite smile, not the familiar CEO smile, but a small, genuine one, brief, almost surprised, as if even he hadn't planned on it. "I hope you'll give me a chance to start over," he said. "At least, as your boss." Jessica took a breath. "Yes," she answered. "I'll do my best. As your employee." Their eyes met for one more second, just one, but enough for Jessica to walk out of his office with the sense that a stolen parking space had led her to a moment she might remember for the rest of her life. Jessica Starling began her first week on the executive floor with one very simple rule: do not draw attention. She arrived 15 minutes early every morning, always dressed neatly and modestly, always spoke with restraint, always took notes with borderline obsessive precision. And above all, she reminded herself that the man who stepped out of that glass-walled office was not the man from the parking lot, nor the man who had apologized to her the evening before. He was the CEO, and she was merely a temporary secretary. At least that was what Jessica repeated to herself every time her heart beat a fraction too fast at the sound of his familiar footsteps approaching from behind. On Monday morning, she was assigned to reorganize a thick stack of documents related to the acquisition of a lakeside hotel, a mountain of dry paperwork filled with numbers and legal clauses. She did what every assistant would do: categorize, label, and color tab. Then, out of habit formed from late-night study sessions at community college, she began writing notes in the margins. Not to correct anyone, just to understand it more clearly. This clause overlaps with Clause 14, valuation based on current cash flow, renovation costs not included, potential legal risk if zoning changes next year. Jessica didn't expect Dominic Sterling to ever read them. She simply thought, if I were the one making decisions, I'd want to know these things. That afternoon, while she was typing an email, a tall, familiar figure stopped in front of her desk. "Jessica," she snapped her head up. "Yes?" Dominic held the hotel file in his hand. That hotel file. "These notes are yours, Antony?" he asked, tapping a finger lightly against the page. Jessica felt her throat tighten. "Yes," she replied. "If you think they're inappropriate, I can—" "No," he said. "Quite the opposite." He looked at her, and something in his gaze shifted. No longer guarded observation, but something closer to genuine attention. Where did you study economics? He asked. Jessica blinked. I study at night, community college, business administration major. Dominic nodded slowly. You pointed out 3 issues my analysis team missed. The sentence made Jessica sit up straighter. I didn't mean to overstep, she said quickly. I just analyze, he finished, and analyzed well. A moment of silence passed, not awkward, simply charged. This afternoon, Dominic continued, I want you in the meeting. Jessica almost dropped her pen. In the meeting with you? With me, he confirmed, and the project team. Her heart thudded. But I'm just the person who saw the problem, Dominic cut in. And I need someone like that. He walked away before she could respond, leaving Jessica frozen at her desk, hands still hovering over the keyboard, head spinning. Breathe, she told herself. It's just work. But when the afternoon meeting began, she wasn't so sure anymore. She sat at the end of the table trying to shrink her existence. Directors exchanged rapid-fire arguments, voices firm, numbers tossed like playing cards. Jessica listened, took notes, stayed silent, until Dominic looked at her. Jessica, he said, your thoughts? Time seemed to slow. Several pairs of eyes turned toward her, curious, skeptical. Jessica inhaled. I could be wrong, she began carefully, but if the renovation takes longer than planned, operating costs will spike. That lowers the profit margin below safety levels for the first 2 years. A man across the table frowned. We accounted for that. Yes, Jessica nodded. But those numbers rely on current building permits. If environmental regulations change, and indicators suggest they will, the timeline may extend. She paused, looked directly at Dominic. I think we need a contingency plan. Silence dropped. Jessica braced for rejection, but Dominic didn't reject her. Prepare a plan B, he instructed the room. Jessica will assist the research team. A few looks shifted, surprised, even irritated. The meeting ended sooner than expected. As people filed out, Jessica gathered her papers, unsure whether she had just done something brilliant or dug herself a grave. Dominic stayed behind. You're not afraid to challenge me, he remarked casually. Jessica looked up. I am afraid, she admitted, but I'm more afraid of the consequences of staying silent. Something flashed in his eyes. Quick, unreadable. Good, Dominic said. I need that. The following day was in the next. Their rhythm took shape. Jessica prepared documents. Dominic reviewed. Their exchanges were short and efficient. No wasted words, no detours. Yet between those tense hours, small details surfaced. Jessica's coffee was always excessively sweet. Dominic discovered this one morning when he accidentally took a sip. How much sugar did you put in this? He asked, unable to hide his shock. Jessica flushed. 3? 3? He repeated. This isn't coffee, it's dessert. She shrugged. I like to start the day with hope. The corner of Dominic's mouth twitched upward. That afternoon, Jessica got so busy she forgot lunch. When she finally looked at the time, it was almost 3, and her stomach grumbled, embarrassingly loud for the executive floor. A paper bag appeared on her desk. She looked up. Dominic stood there. Don't look at me like that, he said. Carolyn told me you haven't eaten. Inside the bag was a sandwich and an apple. I can buy my dash dash. I know, he interrupted, but I don't want you working hungry. Jessica glanced at the bag, then at him. Thank you, she said softly. He nodded and walked away. But the half-second pause he took, just long enough to make sure she opened it, warmed her in ways she couldn't explain. By Friday, Dominic called her into his office again. This time not because of the parking lot, not to apologize, but for work. I want you directly on the Lakeside Hotel project, he said, blunt and certain. Not just administrative support, as part of the core team. Jessica stared at him. I don't have their qualifications. But you have a mind, Dominic replied, and integrity. I can teach what you lack. I can't teach someone to tell the truth. He held her gaze. If you agree, you'll work with me. Jessica inhaled deeply. She knew everything would change from this moment on. I agree, she said. Dominic nodded. Then he said, and gave the faintest smile, "Welcome to the team." And Jessica understood that this was no longer a temporary job. It was the beginning of something much, much bigger. Night falls over Chicago slowly, not in a sudden darkness, but as if the city knows how to stretch the moment, allowing the lights from nearby buildings to switch on, floor by floor, layer by layer, until a shimmering sea of brightness forms beneath a pitch-black sky. The glass conference room on the executive floor now held only two people, Jessica Starling and Dominic Sterling. Beyond the transparent walls, the city reflected them back. Two figures standing closer than necessary inside a space designed to control everything, except emotion. "We need to review the compensation clause again," Dominic said, his voice low and focused. "If the seller deliberately delays the permit, we lose leverage." Jessica nodded, lowering her gaze to the documents. "I agree," she said. "But if we add a strict time condition, they'll push for a higher price." Dominic stepped closer, positioning himself beside her to see the laptop screen more clearly. The distance between them shortened, until all that remained was the faint scent of paper, coffee, and something distinctly his, clean, deep, unshowy. Jessica realized her breathing had slowed. "I think we should hold the price," she continued, keeping her voice steady even as every nerve tightened. "But add a clear penalty clause. That forces them to think carefully." He leaned in, one hand braced against the glass table behind her, the other flipping a page. "Good idea," Dominic said directly above her head. "Too close." Jessica swallowed. She could feel the warmth of his body. Not a touch, just close enough for her skin to remember there was someone else there. She forced her eyes to stay on the page. "Just work," she told herself. "Just work." But when Dominic bent lower to read the fine print at the bottom of the page, his breath brushed lightly against her hair. Jessica stilled for a fraction of a second, long enough for him to notice. "Sorry," Dominic said immediately, stepping back half a pace. It's fine," she replied too quickly. They looked at each other. A brief moment, but their gazes collided like opposing tides. Not violent, just quiet and deep. Outside, a train slid past, its light sweeping across the glass wall, briefly illuminating the room before it softened into shadow again. "It's late," Jessica said, glancing at her watch. "Almost 10. "I know," Dominic replied. "If you're tired—" "I'm fine," she said at once. "I'm used to working late." He studied her a beat longer than necessary. "Used to working late," Dominic repeated softly, "and getting up early." Jessica shrugged. "There are things you're not allowed to be tired of," she said. "You're only allowed to do them." That sentence darkened his gaze, not with desire, but with something deeper. Dominic turned back to the table and poured 2 glasses of water. "Have some," he said, sliding one toward her. "Coffee this late will only wear you down." It was the first time he called her M, not deliberate, not emphasized, just slipping naturally from his mouth, so naturally that both of them froze for a short beat. Jessica took the glass. Her fingers brushed lightly against his. Just a touch, not even a second, but this time neither of them pulled away right away. They stood still. The air felt thick. Jessica could hear her own heartbeat, rapid, unruly, completely out of sync with reason. Dominic glanced down at their nearly touching hands, then looked up at her. That look was no longer the CEO's. It was the look of a man recognizing something dangerous. "Jessica," he said, his voice lower than usual, "we should—" The sentence broke off halfway, not for lack of words, but because the distance between them was no longer safe. Jessica lifted her chin slightly, pure instinct, and Dominic, pulled by some invisible force, lowered his head very slowly. She could count every one of his breaths, feel the space between them shrinking. A thought flashed through her mind. Just one more step. Not the kind of kiss from easy romance stories, but a kiss that would change everything. Jessica closed her eyes for a split second. Then she stepped back, fast, decisive. "No," she said, her voice trembling just slightly but clear. "I can't." The sudden space between them felt like someone had yanked tight an invisible cord. Dominic froze. "Jessica!" "If this happens," she said, not looking at him, her hands clenched together to steady herself. I won't be seen for my ability anymore. I fought too long to stand here. She drew a deep breath. I can't trade everything for one moment. Silence fell, heavy but necessary. Dominic looked at her for a long time. Not angry, not offended, just understanding. You're right, he said at last, and I'm sorry. She looked up. No, Jessica shook her head. I don't blame you. Then in a quieter voice, I'm just afraid, if I cross that line, I won't be able to come back. Dominic nodded slowly. I won't pressure you, he said, and I won't let this affect your work here. He said it with the seriousness of a man who keeps his word. Jessica exhaled, only then realizing she'd been holding her breath. Thank you, she said. He stepped farther back, creating a clear distance. We'll stop here for tonight, Dominic said. We'll continue tomorrow. Jessica gathered the papers, her hands still slightly unsteady, her heart still racing, but her mind slowly settling. As she left the conference room, Dominic remained behind the glass, watching her go. Not with impulsive desire, but with the gaze of a man who had begun to want more than work, and who understood that what he wanted would not come easily. Jessica stepped into the elevator as the doors closed. She leaned back against the cool glass wall, pressed a hand to her chest where her heart still pounded wildly. She had stepped away, but she also knew the boundary they had just drawn would only make both of them more acutely aware of what they were trying to restrain. And from this moment on, whatever existed between her and Dominic Sterling was no longer a matter of if, it was only a matter of when. One fine day, Vivian Monroe stepped out of the elevator as if this entire building had been constructed to serve as her backdrop. She didn't need to look at the directory, didn't need to ask reception, didn't need to announce herself. She strode across the wooden floor of the executive level in perfectly matching cream heels, a silk dress hugging her slim figure, her blonde hair styled to perfection. The kind of beauty that could only be maintained with money, time, and privileges very few people ever had. Jessica Starling sensed her presence before she even saw her face. The air shifted. Small conversations stopped. A few assistants looked up. A quick glance flicked toward Dominic Sterling, who was standing in his glass office. And then Vivian was standing in front of Jessica's desk. Dominic, she said, her voice light and smooth as poured honey, completely ignoring Jessica. I'm back. Jessica looked up. She had seen beautiful women before. But Vivian Monroe wasn't just beautiful. She was perfect. Everything was calculated, from the cut of the dress, the tiny exquisite earrings, to the way her gaze skimmed over Jessica as if she were just a misplaced piece of furniture. Dominic froze, only for a brief, almost invisible beat. Vivian, he said. He didn't raise his voice. It didn't soften either. You shouldn't be here. Vivian smiled and saw him, a smile that never reached her eyes. You're still the same, she said, always too serious. I just got back from Paris. Didn't tell you, because I wanted to surprise you. She turned to Jessica for the first time, her eyes sweeping from head to toe. Quick, efficient. And this must be, Vivian tilted her head, the new secretary? Jessica stood up on reflex. Jessica Starling, she said, her voice so steady it surprised even her. It's a pleasure to meet you. Vivian didn't offer her hand. She let out a soft laugh. How cute, Vivian said. Dominic always has a new secretary every few years. The previous ones were different. Jessica didn't need to ask how they were different. She could feel it. The air tightened slightly around her chest as if someone had just pulled a corset string. Vivian, Dominic said, his voice dropping a shade lower. That's enough. I'm just curious, Vivian replied, her tone sweet as sugar. Does Sterling Industries have a new standard now? She looked at Jessica again, this time for longer. How old are you? She asked. Vivian, Dominic repeated. 20-something? Vivian guessed. Still using coupons for lunch? Still believing that working hard is all it takes? Jessica felt her hands go cold. Not from fear, from the awareness of the gap between them. Vivian didn't need to raise her voice, didn't need to insult her directly. She only had to exist, and everything else automatically seemed smaller. How long have you been working here? Vivian asked, as if genuinely interested. Almost 2 weeks, Jessica answered. Oh, Vivian nodded. So new. I was with Dominic for almost 3 years. The words dropped like a stone. 3 years. The air in Jessica's head seemed to vibrate. 3 years. We were engaged, Vivian added very lightly, very casually, as if she were talking about the weather in the south of France. Of course. That was before a few unwise decisions were made. Her gaze slid toward Dominic, carrying a hint of reproach. But no hurt, only the memory of ownership. I don't know who you are, Vivian continued, turning back to Jessica. But let me give you one piece of advice. She stepped half a pace closer. Worlds like this, Vivian said, her voice low, are not meant for people who only understand half the rules. Jessica felt something inside her hollow out, not because Vivian was right, but because a small part of her was afraid she might be. Dominic stepped forward, very decisively. Vivian, that's enough. His voice was as sharp and cold as a well-honed blade. You don't have the right to speak to my employee like that. Vivian froze for exactly 1 second. Just one. But for Vivian Monroe, that was no small collision. Since when do you care so much about... She stopped, then gave a thin smile. Your employees like this? Since I decided not to let anyone cross my line, Dominic replied, and you're doing that right now. He looked straight at her. Our engagement ended because of your decision, not mine, and it doesn't give you the right to come back here and manipulate or belittle anyone. Vivian laughed softly. You've changed, she said. Yes, Dominic replied, and I don't intend to apologize for it. Silence stretched. Vivian looked at him for a long moment, then turned to Jessica one last time. This time her gaze no longer held contempt. It was a warning. Don't mistake politeness for long-term protection, she said. What he gives you today could disappear tomorrow. Then, as if she felt she'd said enough, Vivian turned and walked toward the elevator. Before the doors closed, she glanced at Dominic once more. I'll wait, she said. You always come back, sooner or later. The elevator doors slid shut. The air on the executive floor let out a long breath. Jessica stood where she was, feeling as if she had just been dragged into a chess game she'd never agreed to play. Don't be long. Those two words appeared clearly in her mind. Dominic turned to her. Are you all right? He asked, his voice much lower than before. Yes, Jessica replied. The word was correct, but her voice was thinner than she would have liked. Dominic looked at her for a long time. There was no desire in his eyes, no pity, only a very clear steadiness. You don't have to prove anything to her, he said, or to anyone here. Jessica pressed her lips together. Sometimes it feels like I'm standing in the wrong place, she said very quietly. Dominic didn't answer with words. He just looked at her, without looking away, without hesitation. And in that gaze, Jessica understood something that made her heart dip. At least for now, he was on her side. She went back to her desk, sat down and laid her hands on the cool, flat surface. She didn't know why, but her throat tightened. Not because of Vivian, but because, for the first time in her life, she had stared straight at what she feared most and realized it hadn't swallowed her. Not yet, and Dominic Sterling was still there, just beyond the glass, his gaze steady, like an unspoken promise. Not yet. Time passed, and their love did not begin with a confession. It began with moments they had to hide. A barely perceptible touch when passing a stack of documents in a narrow hallway. A glance held a beat too long in a meeting room, then was quickly withdrawn when someone else entered. Standing closer than necessary, close enough for both of them to feel it, but not close enough for anyone else to suspect. Jessica Starling learned not to turn around whenever Dominic Sterling appeared behind her. Not because she didn't want to, but because she wanted not to reveal anything. She was still an employee, still someone who had to prove her competence every single day, and still painfully vulnerable to being seen differently if anyone noticed how close she stood to the center of power. Dominic understood that. There were late meetings that stretched well into the night when the executive floor was nearly empty. He would wait until she finished gathering her things without saying a word, then step into the elevator beside her. No touching, no speaking, just standing close. That distance was enough for her to feel his breathing, the clean scent of his shirt mixed with printer paper and bitter coffee. One night like that, just as the elevator doors closed, Jessica suddenly realized she was trembling. Dominic noticed. "Cold?" he asked quietly. "No," she replied faster than usual. "Just tired." He nodded as if he believed it. But when the elevator stopped, when the empty corridor appeared, when every camera became nothing more than a blind mechanical eye, his hand closed gently around her wrist. Just for a second, very fast, as if he were testing the boundary himself. Jessica's heart skipped violently. "Dominic," she whispered. He looked at her, no longer a CEO's gaze, no longer the look of a man in control. It was the look of a man who wanted something and was holding himself back. "Just a little," he said, not asking but not forcing. "If you don't want—" She placed her hand on his chest, of her own will. It was enough to silence him. Their kiss was unhurried, not possessive, not consuming. Just lips touching lips, so lightly, as if they were both afraid the sound would escape into the hallway. Their breathing mingled. Jessica shivered softly, her fingers clutching the lapel of his jacket. Dominic placed one hand on her back, not pulling her closer, just steadying her so she wouldn't step away. When they parted, both of them were breathing hard, but neither smiled. Because that kiss carried no carefree joy. It carried a clear awareness of risk. "We can't," Jessica began. "I know," Dominic replied, his forehead resting lightly against hers. "I know." And precisely because he knew, she allowed herself to kiss him once more. Shorter, hotter. Then she stepped back before reason unraveled. In the days that followed, their love slipped quietly into the smallest spaces of work. Jessica placed his coffee on the left side of his desk instead of the right, because he was left-handed. Dominic made sure she always left meetings before it got too late, always with perfectly reasonable explanations. Their touches became more covert, a finger brushing lightly across her back as he passed behind her, a hand resting at her waist just barely, when they stood side by side at the presentation board in a dim meeting room. No one said anything, but everything was felt. Jessica began to feel afraid. Not afraid of Dominic, afraid of other people's eyes, afraid of whispered conversations in the pantry, afraid of glances that lingered too long, afraid of the way Vivian sometimes looked at her, as if measuring something that might be taken away. One afternoon, as Jessica was printing documents, another female assistant stood beside Dominic, too close, and smiled at him longer than necessary. A strange feeling rose in Jessica's chest, not violent, but sharp enough to sting. When they returned to the office, Dominic closed the door. "I don't like the way she looks at you," Jessica said quickly, then immediately regretted saying it. Dominic tilted his head, studying her. "Jealous?" he asked, without mockery. Jessica flushed. "I don't have the right to be," she said. "I just—" He stepped closer, just a little. "You do," Dominic said. "With me." His voice was low, certain. She looked at him, afraid and warm at the same time. "I don't want this to cost you everything," she said. "I don't want to be seen as someone who's taking advantage." Dominic fell quiet. "I'm the one who's afraid," he said softly. "Afraid that one day you'll look at me and see nothing but trouble." He lifted his eyes, open and honest. "Afraid you'll leave because staying would make you feel smaller." Jessica shook her head slightly and reached up to touch his chin. "I'm more afraid of leaving," she said. This kiss was deeper, not because of desire, but because of the very real fear they both carried. They didn't pull each other toward a bed. They didn't cross the final boundary. They simply stood there, holding each other in a brightly lit office, like two people guarding a secret too large to speak out loud, a secret that made their hearts race and made every risk feel worth it. When Jessica stepped into the elevator later that night, Dominic caught her hand once more. "Be careful," he said, "and thank you." "For what?" "For not walking away," he replied. The elevator doors closed. Jessica leaned back against the mirrored wall, her hand lifting to her lips, where the kiss had just been left behind like a silent vow. Their love had no name yet, but it had warmth. It had breath. It had boundaries held in place by sheer will. And in the shadows between work, power, and city lights, that love continued to burn quietly, not fragile, not weak. Rumors don't explode like bombs. They start like dust, small, floating, nearly invisible, until you realize you're breathing them in and your lungs start to hurt. For Jessica Starling, that morning began like any other. She arrived early, made coffee, turned on her computer, but the air on the executive floor wasn't the same as yesterday. A conversation stopped when she walked by. A quiet laugh cut off midway. A glance flicked in her direction, then snapped away, as if the eyes had strayed somewhere they shouldn't have. Jessica sensed it with the instinct of someone who had survived harsh environments. Something was wrong. In the pantry, two female assistants were standing by the coffee machine. When Jessica stepped in, they went silent. One lowered her gaze to her phone. The other smiled. A tight smile, stretched so thin it was no longer friendly. "Good morning," Jessica said. Morning," one replied. "Your coffee today, sweet enough?" The question made Jessica's heart stutter. No outsider knew that habit. The rumor knows details small enough to sting, she thought. Back at her desk, a file had been placed slightly off-center. Clear evidence someone had touched her workspace. Nothing taken, just a trace left behind. Jessica opened her email. Nothing unusual. But in her inbox was an anonymous message, only one short line. "There is a faster way to get close to the CEO." She stared at the screen. Her heart beat hard, then slower, as if her body was protecting her by refusing to let any emotion spill over. She deleted the message. No reply, no reaction. That was all. But at noon during a brief project meeting, the way a few men in the room looked at her had changed. Not blatant contempt, something worse. Judgment. Jessica presented as she always did. Clear, concise, anchored in data. But when she finished, there was no acknowledgement. Just an unnatural pause. "We'll review," one director said. "Might need an additional opinion." Dominic sat at the head of the table, his jaw clenched. Jessica saw it, the way his hand tightened around his pen. The meeting ended early. After everyone left, Dominic stayed. "What's going on?" he asked directly. No preamble. Jessica didn't answer. "I've heard things," he continued, voice low and cold. "Untrue and unacceptable." "Don't," Jessica whispered. He looked at her surprised. "Don't ask," she said, "and don't react." "Jessica!" "If you do anything," she cut in, meeting his eyes for the first time in this mess, "it becomes proof." That stopped him. "Proof of what?" he asked. "Of what they're saying," she replied. "That I'm only here because of you." The air thickened. "I don't care what they say," Dominic said, voice hardening. "I'll make this public. I'll end it." Jessica shook her head. "If you do that," she said, her voice trembling just slightly, "everything I've worked for will be erased." She stepped back. "I fought to be respected," she said, "not to become a whisper." Dominic moved closer. "You're not a whisper." "But they'll turn me into one," Jessica said. Her voice wasn't loud. She didn't cry. It was simply pain, the kind that had lived with her long enough to know its way around her ribs. She left the room before he could speak. That afternoon, Jessica heard her name more times than necessary, yet never addressed directly. "Did you hear? She's close with the boss." No wonder she moved up so fast. In the elevator, a man behind her spoke on the phone, voice just quiet enough to be loud enough. "Yeah, exactly like that." Jessica stared at her reflection in the mirrored doors. She didn't turn around. She left work late that evening. Outside, the Chicago night wind slapped her face with icy force. She stood still for a moment, breathing deep, letting the city drown the tightness in her throat. Her phone buzzed. A message from Dominic. "I won't let this continue." Jessica closed her eyes and then typed back, "Please don't." A minute, two, three. His reply came, "I can't stand it." She knew. That was precisely why she had to. The next day, Jessica requested a half-day off for personal reasons. No one asked further. When she returned that afternoon, she discovered her schedule had been altered. Meetings she had once been part of no longer included her. No confrontation, just erasure. Jessica sat at her desk, staring at the empty spaces in her calendar. That's it, she thought. They don't need to fire me. They just need to make me disappear. That night, Dominic called her into his office. I'm talking to the board, he said the moment she stepped inside. I'll put an end to this. Jessica set her hand on his desk. No, she said. You can't. You're being hurt, he replied, anger bleeding through. I won't stand here and do nothing. I'm being hurt because you're standing too close, she said, her voice cracking. Silence filled the space between them. I need you to help me by not helping, she continued softer. Let me stand on my own. Dominic looked at her as if someone had taken from him the very thing he wanted to protect. What are you sacrificing, he asked. Jessica didn't answer right away. She thought of every effort, every late-night study session, every part-time job, the quiet pride of stepping onto the executive floor. I'm sacrificing the feeling of being protected, she said, and maybe sacrificing you. The words hit harder than any accusation. Dominic turned away, his hand curling into a fist. I refuse to accept that, he said. I don't, Jessica whispered. She walked out of his office, did not look back. In the elevator, tears fell soundlessly. She wiped them quickly, straightening her spine as the doors slid open. Because if there was one brutal rule here, it was this. You are never allowed to break when someone is watching. But Jessica Starling knew better than anyone. Some wounds exist, whether witnessed or not. And that night, lying in her small apartment, she understood. This battle was no longer about love. It was about honor. And soon she would have to make a decision more painful than silence itself. The call came at 11:47 p.m. Jessica Starling was sitting on the kitchen floor, her laptop open in front of her, trying to finish the final edits on a project proposal she might not even need tomorrow. When her phone vibrated, she knew before she looked at the screen. Her mother only called at that hour when something was wrong. Jessica, her mother's voice came through, weak and raspy. Are you busy? Her heart tightened. No, Mom, I'm here. A very brief silence. Then her mother spoke, slowly, as if each word weighed more than the last. I'm at the hospital. Jessica jumped to her feet. What happened, Mom? She asked, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the edge of the counter. My kidneys aren't doing well, her mother said. The doctors say I need surgery soon. It's urgent. The room around Jessica seemed to fracture. She leaned against the wall and slid down to the floor. How soon? She asked, her voice hoarse. They say 1 or 2 days, her mother replied. But the insurance won't cover everything. I don't want you to worry. Jessica didn't listen any further. She didn't need to. She was used to counting money before counting hope. After the call ended, she sat very still in the dark kitchen for a long time. Fluorescent light spilled onto the cold tile floor, casting a blurred reflection of herself, a strong woman who had just been pushed to the edge. She opened a spreadsheet. Savings, $3,200. Credit she might be able to borrow, $15,000 if she were lucky. Estimated surgery cost, $80,000. The distance between those numbers was too wide to be called math anymore. It was fate. Jessica closed her eyes. One name surfaced clearly, instinctively. Dominic. One sentence, one signature, one check. If he spoke, everything would be solved before morning. Tears welled up, not from relief, but from fear. She could see the scene too clearly, herself standing in the glass office, hands shaking, voice breaking as she told the truth. Dominic looked at her with that familiar gentle expression, pulling out his phone without hesitation. I'll take care of it. And he would. But then what? Then what would she be? A woman who had been saved, an employee kept because of emotion, living proof of every poisonous whisper that had ever followed her. Jessica closed the laptop. Number. She had come too far to beg, too far to trade her dignity for temporary safety. She sat there thinking. After one night of thought, she decided to write a letter by hand. Dominic, I'm sorry to leave so suddenly. My mother is seriously ill. I need time to take care of her. This decision has nothing to do with my work or with anyone at Sterling Industries. Thank you for the opportunity, for your trust, and for treating me with the respect I will always remember. Jessica. She read it again. No mention of love, no mention of money, no mention of a heart breaking apart, just a proper resignation. She folded the paper carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote his name in her familiar handwriting, slightly slanted, slightly soft. Then she stopped looking at it. The next morning, Chicago woke up to rain. Fine drops tapped steadily against the windows, blurring the world outside as a painting wiped too hard. Jessica entered the Sterling Industries building one last time, earlier than usual. The executive floor was still quiet. Warm yellow lights were already on. Everything looked cruelly normal. She set her bag down at her desk, took out the envelope, looked at the double wooden doors leading into Dominic Sterling's office. One knock, one conversation, one moment of meeting his eyes. Jessica knew if she did that, she wouldn't be able to leave. She quietly set the envelope down in front of the door, so gently it made no sound. Then she turned away. In the pantry, she made herself a cup of coffee with less sugar than usual. She drank it slowly. At her desk, she deleted her personal files from the computer, returned her access card, neatly arranged the papers she was leaving behind for Carolyn. No one asked, no one noticed in time. At 8:13, Jessica stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and just then, her phone vibrated. Dominic's name appeared on the screen. Jessica closed her eyes, did not answer. The elevator descended to the lobby. The doors opened to the sound of rain and the scent of a wet city. Upstairs, Dominic Sterling stood in his office, holding the thin letter in his hand. He read it. Once, then again. Every word was proper. Every sentence held distance. There was nothing to argue with, nothing to hold on to. Only one painfully clear truth. He had lost her, and she had chosen to leave without giving him the chance to save her. He stepped out into the hallway. "Jessica?" he called. No answer. Carolyn froze when she saw his face. She's gone, she said quietly. Dominic said nothing. He stared at the empty space in front of the desk outside his office, where Jessica had once sat. That afternoon, Jessica sat on a train heading toward the suburbs, watching rain streak down the window. She placed a hand over her chest, where the pain still lived, dull, aching, but not dirty. She had kept the most important thing, her dignity, and somewhere deep in her heart, she hoped that if he had ever truly loved her, one day he would understand why she couldn't stay. Their goodbye had no embrace, no final kiss, no promises, only silence. Heavy, brutal, but honest. And sometimes, that is the only way to love without disappearing yourself. The surgery lasted nearly 4 hours. Jessica Starling sat on a hard plastic chair in the hospital corridor. Her fingers interlocked so tightly her knuckles turned white. The merciless, fluorescent lights reflected every crease of worry etched across her face. No lipstick, no office attire, just a thin sweater and jeans, as if this place had stripped away every layer she once used to armor herself. She had signed the admission papers. She had filled out the forms. She had rehearsed what to say to the doctor, but she had never signed any payment documents. Jessica realized that when a nurse approached, holding a slim folder. "Miss Starling?" "Yes." "The surgery fees were fully paid at 5 this morning." Jessica froze. "There must be a mistake," she said, voice low and hoarse. "My family hasn't." The nurse smiled gently. "No mistake. A benefactor completed everything." "A benefactor?" The nurse paused, as if weighing whether she should say more. "He didn't leave his name, only left a note. Make sure Mrs. Starling receives the best care." Jessica leaned back against the wall. She didn't need to guess. She closed her eyes, her heart tightening, both saved and struck at its weakest point. Dominic Sterling was in his office when the hospital called. He didn't ask the cost, didn't ask about the process, didn't ask about conditions. He said only one thing: do it. Then he sat there in his glass office overlooking Lake Michigan, feeling, for the first time in years, that he didn't need to control the outcome. He just needed her not to lose her mother. But that afternoon, when the surgery was finished, he didn't go to the hospital. He stayed away. He waited, because some acts of love, if witnessed, turn into charity. Jessica found him later that day. The rain had stopped. leaving the city smelling damp and raw. Sterling Industries stood tall in front of her, untouched by the disasters unraveling inside her life. She wore no makeup, no armor, only a heart furious at being loved in a way she hadn't chosen. Dominic was standing by the window when she entered his office. Without knocking, the door closing behind her with a soft click. "You paid," Jessica said, direct and sharp. Dominic turned. His eyes didn't shift, didn't avoid. "Yes." "Why did you do that?" Dominic answered. "As someone who loves you." Jessica laughed, a sound without joy. "You love me." "Don't," she said, voice shaking. "Do you know why I left? To salvage whatever dignity I had left?" Dominic stepped closer. "Yeah, I couldn't let you lose your mother because of pride," he said. "That pride is mine," Jessica shouted, for the first time shattering the self-restraint she'd guarded for months. "Do you know how long it took for me to stand tall there? How long it take for me not to be seen as someone who clings? If you think I did this because of—" "No," she cut him off. "I know you did it out of love, and that's why I can't bear it." She inhaled sharply, tears spilling over. "If I accept that help, I'll always owe something. Not money, but myself." Dominic stopped in front of her, very close. "Jessica," he said, for the first time exposing fear in his voice, "you're not something I own. You're someone I can't survive losing." She shook her head. "You don't understand. I left to save myself." "No," Dominic said, voice dropping so low it nearly broke. "You left to protect me from the rumors, and protect yourself from feeling weak in front of the man you love." He cupped her cheek gently. "I love you," Dominic said, "and I loved you from the day in the parking lot, when you stood in front of me like I was just another man." Those words toppled the last defense Jessica had left. "If you love me," she whispered, "why don't you let me choose?" "Because sometimes," Dominic answered, pressing his forehead to hers, "love doesn't ask permission. It acts when there's no other choice." She didn't pull away when he kissed her. The kiss wasn't gentle. It didn't leave space. His mouth claimed hers with everything he had caged inside. Fear, anger, desire, the agony of nearly losing her. Jessica kissed him back, not because she was weak, but because she chose to stay. Her hands gripped his shirt. Her heart pounded so hard that it no longer understood right or wrong. When they finally broke apart, their foreheads still touching. "If I come back," Jessica panted, "everything will explode." "Let me handle that," Dominic replied. "You don't have to fight alone anymore." That afternoon, Dominic Sterling walked into the main boardroom. The board members, senior executives, and assistants were already seated. Jessica sat at the far end, hands on her lap, spine straight despite her racing pulse. Dominic rose. "I have something to clarify," he said, voice deep and unwavering. "About the recent rumors." Silence. "Jessica Starling and I are in a relationship." Gas rippled around the room. Dominic continued without pause. "She is not here for advancement. She is not favored. She is here because of her ability, and any judgment of her character is a judgment of mine." He turned toward Jessica. "Anyone who questions her honor questions my authority." No one spoke. "The rumors end now," Dominic said. "Anyone uncomfortable with that may leave this company." The silence this time surrendered. When they stepped out, the hallway lights caught Jessica's face, tears still there, but no longer falling. Dominic took her hand, didn't hide it. "I didn't ask permission," he murmured. Jessica looked at him, the man who broke every rule just to keep her. "This time," she whispered through a trembling smile, "I give it." Outside, the city kept roaring, but in that moment, between a held hand and an unflinching gaze, Jessica understood. The greatest love isn't the one that arrives gently. It's the one that stands upright in the storm and speaks its name out loud. The Level 3 parking garage of Sterling Industries was unexpectedly quiet on a Saturday morning. No engines, no hurried footsteps, only early sunlight slipping through concrete gaps, falling in pale bands across the floor, still carrying the familiar scent of motor oil. Jessica Starling stopped in the middle of the lane and looked around. "You brought me here for what?" she asked, her voice mildly suspicious, though the corner of her mouth curved into a small smile. Dominic Sterling stood a few steps away, hands in his pockets, his expression far gentler than the man who had once stood here years ago. "I think," he said slowly, "everything most valuable in my life started here." Jessica let out a soft laugh. "You're romanticizing a pretty terrible argument." "No," Dominic replied. He stepped forward, standing exactly where he had once been, where the Mercedes had slid in, where she had stood, furious and shaking, yet refusing to back down. "I'm remembering the first moment someone wasn't afraid of me." She looked at him, her heart softening. "I was afraid," Jessica said. "I was just more afraid of staying silent." Dominic took his hand out of his pocket. In his palm was a small, deep gray velvet box. All sound seemed to disappear. He knelt on the cool concrete. No spectacle, no audience, only sunlight and memory. "Jessica Starling," he said, his voice steady, though his eyes were unexpectedly warm. "I've loved you since the day you called me selfish and didn't apologize for it." She laughed through the tears rising in her eyes. "I love you for your intelligence, for the way you work all the way to the end, for the way you walked away when you needed to protect yourself, even when it hurt me." He opened the box. The ring wasn't flashy, simple and elegant, just like her. A small, brilliant diamond set neatly on a platinum band. "I don't promise you a life without challenges," Dominic said, "but I promise this. I will never stand in front of you like a wall. I'll only stand beside you, if you'll have me." Jessica raised her hand to her mouth, nodding as tears fell. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling softly. "Yes, I've agreed for a long time now." Dominic stood and slid the ring onto her finger. When they embraced, sunlight streamed fully across the empty garage, bathing them in a gentle gold, as if the place itself were offering its blessing. They laughed, a real laugh. Light, whole, unbroken. Their wedding took place on an early summer afternoon. Not large, not extravagant. A small garden overlooking Lake Michigan, a soft breeze, simple white flowers lining the aisle. Jessica wore a clean-lined wedding dress, elegant without a train. Dominic wore a light gray suit, no tie, looking more like a happy man than the CEO of a corporation. When Jessica walked toward him, Dominic looked at her as though every number, every deal he had ever conquered had suddenly become meaningless. They exchanged brief vows, just one sentence each. "I choose you," Dominic said. "I choose myself, and I choose you," Jessica replied with a smile. Applause rose, warm and sincere. Life after marriage wasn't a path paved with flowers, but it was a life chosen, every single day. Jessica continued working and rising on her own merit. She accepted no appointed roles. When she became vice president of operations, there were no whispers left. People read the reports. They looked at the results. She returned to the classroom at night and completed the MBA she had once dreamed of. At home, she hung her diploma beside an old photograph, the empty level 3 garage, sunlight slanting across the floor. Dominic changed too, quietly. He came home earlier, cooked more, and learned to use less salt. Sent texts asking, "Have you eaten?" Not out of obligation, but pleasure. He learned to truly listen and to let others lead when needed. On his desk sat a small photo frame. Jessica laughing in the garage, sunlight breaking softly across her lashes. Happiness was no longer a destination, it was a rhythm. One weekend morning, they returned to the old garage. No plans, no ceremony. The space was empty. Sunlight poured in, forming translucent rectangles across the floor. Dominic parked and turned off the engine. They sat there unhurried. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, as if recalling a question from long ago. Jessica shook her head. "I'm grateful," she said, "because if I'd taken one step back that day, I wouldn't have this life." Dominic smiled. They stepped out of the car. Standing in the empty garage, they laughed, laughter echoing, youthful, unafraid of being heard. No more secrets. No more glass offices. Just two people who had chosen each other and chosen themselves. Jessica took his hand and lifted her face toward the sunlight. And somewhere deep within, the narration closes. Sometimes fate doesn't arrive with flowers and music. but with a stolen parking space and a heart brave enough not to step back.